Continuing our series of lectures on argumentation for the AP English Language and Composition. This is lecture 3, and today we'll talk about reading the text. We've talked about the introductory material and how to read the prompt. Today, reading the text. Okay, so when reading the argument prompt, we have to remember that there are so many different excerpts, statements, or quotations that you're going to receive that you have to be able to navigate through them. And you can never begin with what is the right answer. There isn't one. It's what can I argue and argue well, and what evidence do I have right now that can prove a certain opinion. You have to consider that for the day of the exam. So, not unlike the rhetorical and synthesis, we have to read the text, paraphrase the text for understanding, and relate that paraphrasing to the way the prompt interprets the text. And this is important, meaning we read what is there, we paraphrase what the text said based on our understanding. Now we have to relate that paraphrasing, meaning our understanding, to the way the writers of the prompt interpreted that same information. Let me give you an example. There is a prompt that quotes Oscar Wilde, where disobedience is man's greatest virtue, I believe it says. And they're talking about disobedience and social progress. You cannot write an essay in response to that wherein you consider how disobedience is good when you are rebelling against your parents, let's say, because that kind of parental disobedience is not equatable to social or political disobedience that leads to social progress. They're not the same. That's what I mean to say. So the difference is that these three things happen simultaneously as you're doing, meaning these three, the argumentative prompt. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to consider our own response to the text. What do I think that the prompt is saying? Relate that understanding to what the prompt is saying, and then reconcile the two and arrive at a conclusion which would become our argument. So, one thing that I want to make clear, though, before we even get into the writing of the essay is the text is not the task. And I say that because there's no there's no actual text provided for the argumentation essay, not like in rhetorical or in synthesis, which gives you 6 or 7 passages, in rhetorical, which gives you one, which you have to analyze. There's no real text here. It's just a quotation or philosophical claim or something like that, right? So take, for instance, this example that I provide here. So the philosophical claim may say something about identity, but the task attached to either one is the real concern of the prompt. So while the quote may say that disobedience is good, the task may be asking whether the quote has relevance or value for today's society. So you shouldn't be talking about disobedience being good some other time unless it relates to the value for today's society. You have to consider what the task is telling you to do, not what the text is telling you to do. So if the philosophical claim says that personal identity is more important than group identity, but the task may ask you to take a position on the relationship between the two, then that's your goal, not on determining whether personal identity is more important than group identity, unless you determine that that's the relationship between the two. That makes sense? So if you are if they give you a text for you to look at, the text will have its own context, its own writer, its own period in time, right? But they don't want you to write about the text as much as they want you to write about the task, meaning what they want you to do. So remember that the task always clarifies what course of action you have to take with the text provided. So the text is always general enough to encourage any idea and response, but you have to align your preferred response with the task provided, right? So let's continue. The text always presents an opportunity to go beyond it. So don't get stuck on the text, right? If they begin with to belong is to understand why you belong, don't fixate your entire writing on that quotation. Don't begin your writing with that quotation. Don't end your writing with that quotation. Don't make everything about that quotation. That quotation is an invitation to a discussion, to you to create your own argument. You have to have your own separate composition that it gravitates around the quotation provided, but it doesn't fixate on the quotation provided. So um, most unsuccessful essays use the text provided in some way, and they use it heavily. This is not necessarily wrong, but they are limited. This limits the way your writing goes. Every essay should stand alone. Cohesive essays read like there was no prompt at all because they are completely independent, and this is the point, right? The text is not the point. It is the task that they give you, it is the idea that you derive from the text that becomes the point of your essay. Now, next time, we'll talk about writing the essay, and that's the big one. Okay.